Hey everyone, it's patch 3.21 Crucible, and I wanted to make one more final update on Ignite EK for this upcoming season. Path of Building has finally been updated to 3.21, so I can look at all of the changes and see what this actually looks like with a proper passive tree. Just from the initial looking at all this, I will say things actually improved quite a lot. This build has actually gotten substantially cheaper overall, so why don't we get into it and talk about it? First thing I want to mention for leveling, a small change has occurred. I completely glanced over this mastery while looking at masteries through the patch notes, and that is the regenerate 1 life per second for each 1% uncapped fire resistance. In this path of building, I simply just put 130% fire resistance to pretend we are res capped at about Act 6. And as you can see, this is giving me 75 flat life regen. This is ridiculously broken. 75 free regen for 1 passive point is going to make your level experience substantially comfier. The point at which you pick this up is when you are respecking in Act 4 or Act 5 to Wave of Conviction. Your tree will look like this while you're playing Spark, and then the goal is going to be to use all of the respec points from all the quests up to this point to respec into these points up here, and then eventually make your way towards Eldritch Battery. Before, on this Fire Mastery, we used to take the node that gave us increased crit multi. Before, on this Fire Mastery, we used to take the node that gave us increased fire damage over time multiplier, and it reduces our fire resistance. But unfortunately, that is gone from the game, and there's nothing else that's really good here. The exposure node is pretty decent. It's a little bit of extra DPS, but there's no way that we're going to take that over the 1% regen per point. You'd also take the conversion, but again, nothing is as good as this free regen. That's the only real change for our leveling experience, other than, of course, you'll now be picking up Deep Thoughts and the Mana Reservation Mastery. This is basically mandatory. Nothing else has really changed for the tree. It's all the same. Next, let's go over to the EK budget section and talk about the changes here. First, we have some masteries being moved around. We obviously have lost a life mastery, so we do have a little bit less life than we used to have before. And if I'm not mistaken, at Asylum, we used to take the resistance and chaos resistance node, which is now unfortunately gone. That means we just pick up corrupted blood. And if you do not need corrupted blood here and you have it on a jewel, you can simply get rid of this for 1 free passive point. We are still taking fire damage multiplier here. We are still taking life here. Obviously, we're taking the new mana reservation node. At this node, we are taking the regen master again because I think this is simply just way too overpowered. This should just be a manual include into this build for the rest of this patch. This little bit of extra regen is just makes your life a lot easier. It actually helps quite a bit with one of this build's problems, which is simply just living on single target fights where you are just fighting a singular boss, as its leech rate was not very good. But having additional 100 regen is pretty nice to have. Last few changes is we are not taking an elemental mastery here anymore. This used to be the 40% increased effective ailments. That is now gone. And we are not taking the mastery here anymore for 25% reduced mana reservation efficiency, which is also gone. But that is fine because we now have the overall reservation efficiency node instead. Only other thing to mention is if you are going for spell suppression cap, what we could do is we can actually take one of the new nodes here. You have phasing. If you have spell suppressed damage recently, 8% chance to spell suppress damage. As you can see, that basically almost makes up for the differences. As long as you get decent spell suppression in your gear, you will be able to spell suppress cap again. One other interesting thing that's been brought up on Reddit is potentially taking the chance to suppress spell damage is lucky. This, especially if you have low spell suppression, so as you're putting your gear together, actually is insanely good. And if you're at maybe 40, 50 spell suppression, this effectively turns your spell suppression into 80 to 90% spell suppression. This does get worse and worse the closer you are to max suppression, so eventually you will want to swap over to the guaranteed. That also gives you phasing. In terms of clusters, everything is staying the same. The biggest change for this path of building, the budget version, is how you will be putting together your auras. So if we go look at our skills, and if we look at our auras, we do not need a level 3 enlighten, period. You do not need an enlighten anymore for this build. This is because the mastery pretty much is better than an enlighten. And if we do need a little bit of extra reservation, if you do not have reservation on your helmet yet, what you could do is you can get a mana reservation efficiency jewel. This plus the mastery completely takes care of it and just completely wipes your need for an enlighten. We are fine to sit at 7 mana because again, we are playing an Eldritch Battery build. So all of our ES is our actual mana pool. Lastly, for the EK swap version, same thing. We are simply just removing a mastery here since we don't really need it anymore. And the other masteries pretty much stay the same. We actually save 2 points when we look at this tree on a max leveled version of it or very close to max leveled. And you can again save 1 point here if you get a leech jewel later. If we look at this version of our auras, we can also see that we do not need an enlighten here. The same thing applies here. We go down to exactly 7 mana, and this is done through a mana reservation efficiency jewel. And again, you can put whatever else you want on this, and through the mastery. Lastly, the final thing I want to talk about is the mid game setup for it and just how much this actually matters for the mid game version. So, the biggest problem with this build is eventually fitting in Grace. Grace is a massive defensive layer for this build, but the only way to realistically do this is by you having to set up a 6-link aura setup. This allows your Enlighten to affect all of your auras, which gives you quite a lot of reservation. And you also need to get a double reservation helmet with reservation as an implicit and reservation from essences. This was already pretty expensive enough. Getting a decent bow was also already pretty expensive as it was. And trying to get a level 4 Enlighten on top of that was really, really bad. Well, now, again, because of the mastery, I am so happy this mastery is back in the game. With this, since this gives more reservation than Enlighten can, we can now instead do this with a level 3 Enlighten, making this 10, 20, however many divs Enlighten will be this season. I expect this to actually be quite a lot of money. Cheaper to swap over to a bow, which effectively triples your damage in comparison to a non-bow setup. That's all there really is for this. I just wanted to point out the regen mastery as this is so much free health regen. And this build is also straight up cheaper now, which is wonderful. That should be the final update that I need to make for this build. I know some people have also mentioned potentially putting Light Poacher in this build. And the problem with Light Poacher is while it's around 12 to 16% more DPS, you also lose your helmets, which we are needing it for the massive amounts of reservation we get. And there's no way to make this up. Your only real option is to potentially drop 2, maybe 3 auras to make it work. You'd have to get rid of Herald of Ash, which we can't really do. This is a 20-ish% of our damage. We can get rid of Herald of Purity. Again, we can't do that. This is 25% of our damage. We could potentially drop Grace or Determination if you want to be squishier. But again, there really isn't anything you can drop. Hatred is required. Herald of Purity is too much. Herald of Ash is too much. Malevolence is being Divine Blessed. There's nothing we can really drop to make up for the reservation. While Light Poachers is nice, you really don't need it. And honestly, this is going to be ridiculously expensive this season that it's not going to really, one, have a good way to be this build, and two, have a reason to buy it. I think the way EK is currently set up is probably the best way to go into the next season. A few people have also mentioned using the new bow, which increases your effect of your quiver. And this might be an interesting way to put the build together. What you can do with this is you can instead run potentially a conversion quiver and then just have bow massively increase the effect of the conversion. So you don't need a conversion watcher's eye to start. This might be okay if you don't have a insane bow. As you can see, even a really good bow, I assume this probably stat actually doesn't work. But even if it did, our quiver, even if it made it twice as good, would barely beat out our bow. And then with that, we lose out on +2 levels of Enlighten and +1 level of all of our auras. And because of all of that, I don't really think it's worth it going for Widow Hail, but it might be an option if you don't want to try and go for Watcher's Eye and convert through a quiver on a more budget setup. This would also make you have to drop an aura, so you might want to do this without Grace or without some Herald, for example. So I really have to say, I hope you PDs enjoy EK. There's been a lot of people who said they're interested in it, who want to play it, who seem like they're going to have a lot of fun with it. Please enjoy, and I hope you have a good time with it. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, or please feel free to ask me on Twitch. I stream every single day. And if not, I hope to see you guys in the next video, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.